The dawn broke over Muddington acres with pale light, washing away soot from the previous night's cascade. Cluck stood atop the highest roosting beam, posture rigid beneath the chill. The wooden slats creaked softly under his weight. He had recovered from the safe house flooding overnight, shaking off dampness and drywall dust. Now he secured the perimeter. The farm slept under dew, unaware of the invisible war fought within its fences. To the farmer, it was poultry management. To Cluck, operational ground zero. The morning air tasted of damp straw and deadlines. A professional assassin does not celebrate victory, he surveys wreckage for secondary threats. The cascade had been a masterpiece of agricultural kinetic energy, but masterpieces leave loose ends. Loose ends are invitations for disaster. Silence was merely a tactical pause before the next move. Cluck scanned the perimeter fence line. Solar-powered sensors, usually dormant until dusk, cycled erratically in the early light. Their amber indicators pulsed rhythmically, betraying a dormant agri-shell fallback protocol. The mechanical explosion had tripped initial containment algorithms, forcing the network into a secondary lockdown sequence. A system designed to protect corporate assets from rogue livestock by sealing barn doors and waiting for surrender. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards. Their mechanical whir cut through the morning quiet. Cluck's head snapped toward the eastern ridge. 3 automated sentry drones detached from charging pylons, hovering silently as their camera lenses rotated with mechanical precision. They were recalibrating sweep patterns. No longer scanning pastures, they converged on the Coop. Flight paths intersected at the gate, then shifted inward toward every exit door and nesting bay. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. Drones mapped breach points to seal permanently. Cluck remained still, feathers ruffling in the breeze. He calculated counter-assault probability at 0% in open terrain. The threat was absolutely imminent. The comms array crackled with static as interference receded, allowing a burst transmission. Henrietta's voice cut through white noise, crisp and unyielding. Their formal alliance had stabilized the network. The temporary disruption ended, but urgency remained. Cluck tilted his head to the encrypted frequency. Henrietta confirmed parameters immediately. The fallback grid was a permanent cordon. Once drones completed their sweep at 1200 hours, Agri-Shell would authorize full structural sealing. Muddington Acres became an isolated containment zone. No animals out, no supplies in. Cluck absorbed the data without blinking. A permanent cordon was merely a complex logistical puzzle requiring a precise spatial solution. He required a primary command node for override codes, but the central server sat miles away behind biometric locks. The local network relied on a relay tower broadcasting from the ridge. He shifted his full weight on the beam, claws gripping the weathered wood deliberately. Gaze tracked drones locking onto thermal signatures. The swarm moved closer, rotors chopping mist into droplets. Cluck mapped the ridge topography. Only one viable target could broadcast a spoofing signal to halt the cascade before noon. An abandoned weather station sat precariously on the eastern escarpment's highest point. Its roof-mounted transmitter had been offline for years, but hardware remained untouched, hardwired into the municipal grid. It was the only elevated position within range to hijack the protocol and reverse the sequence. Cluck turned slowly toward Henrietta's direction through the channel. He mentally logged coordinates. The abandoned weather station was the primary command node. The strict timeline for permanent lockdown was officially locked at 1200 hours. Less than 4 hours remained to cross open ground, navigate a derelict structure, and rewrite the farm's fate. Mission parameters were clear. Perimeter sensors would cycle until overridden. Drones maintained sweep patterns until noon. Cluck adjusted stance, shedding morning lethargy. He was not merely a rooster perched in straw, he was the bantam, and the fallback protocol was about to become obsolete. He scanned the perimeter one last time, committing patrol intervals to memory. The command node location was identified. The timeline for permanent lockdown was confirmed. Now came tactical planning. Cluck watched the sunrise carefully, casting long shadows across the tactical trap he intended to spring. The morning mist clung to the lower pastures like a tactical fog bank. Cluck stood at the Coop threshold, eyes tracking the sweeping red laser grids pulsing across the northern ridge. Automated sentry drones had recalibrated their patrol vectors following yesterday's machinery cascade. To the untrained eye, they were agricultural oversight units. To Cluck, they were blind spots waiting to be exploited. Henrietta hopped onto a nearby fence post. The comms network still suffered from intermittent static, a lingering ghost of the electronic interference that had fractured their coordination. They relied on shared command authority and practiced nonverbal cues. Cluck dipped his head once toward the drainage culvert. Henrietta nodded, tapping her beak twice against the wood. The route was mapped in his mind before he took a single step. The irrigation trenches ran like subterranean arteries beneath the farm, carved during the original land survey and forgotten by everyone except the livestock. Cluck stepped into the narrow channel, damp earth yielding to his talons. He moved with deliberate precision, keeping low as he navigated the labyrinthine system. Above him, drone grids swept in rhythmic arcs, their sensors calibrated to detect large thermal signatures. A rooster was nothing but ambient background heat. Henrietta followed along the trench's upper lip, her eyes scanning the topography. She communicated via sharp clucks and wing flicks that Cluck translated into tactical data. The weather station sat perched on the eastern hill, a glass-domed node monitored by Agri-Shell. Its main relay drew power directly from the farm's primary distribution grid. If they could tap into the secondary line and introduce a calculated surge, the relay would trip. Overload required exactly 412 watts, sustained for 3 seconds before safety breakers engaged. Anything less would be ignored. Anything more would trigger a hard lockdown. Cluck paused at a junction where 3 channels converged, his internal monologue running through the arithmetic with cold professionalism. The Bantam did not improvise power grids. He engineered them. He noted the exposed conduit beneath a collapsed wooden plank and marked it as the primary ingress point. Henrietta's sharp call drew his attention upward. A shadow passed over the trench, sweeping wide against the morning light. Mother Hen's aerial surveillance had shifted its pattern. The traitor was still watching, probing for weakness in the farm's new defensive posture. Cluck filed the observation away. Timing would be everything. He emerged from the trench system near the silo access road, where Gerald was already pacing with restless energy. Hooves clicked against gravel. Cluck approached him with measured steps, tapping his wing twice on a rusted tractor tire to establish focus. Henrietta joined them, her posture rigid with tactical urgency. The briefing required absolute clarity. Gerald would not be asked for complex maneuvers. He would be asked to do what he did best. A controlled distraction was required near the node's access road. Gerald needed to locate a stack of discarded pallets behind the equipment shed, knock them into a precarious lean, and charge down the gravel drive at maximum velocity. The resulting cascade of wood would draw every patrol guard toward the secondary perimeter. It would buy exactly 4 minutes of unmonitored access to the weather station's lower maintenance hatch. Cluck emphasized the timing with a sharp peck on the ground. Gerald bleated in enthusiastic agreement, already visualizing the structural collapse he was about to engineer. With the diversion locked in, Cluck turned to the final component. He retreated to the western edge of the Coop yard, where discarded renovation materials sat beneath a tarp. The copper roofing strips had been salvaged during the farmer's latest poultry show preparations, coiled neatly in a mesh sack. Cluck hopped onto the pile, his beak finding purchase on the first strip. He pulled it free with careful precision. Using a discarded staple from a feed bag, he crimped one end into a secure loop and stripped the insulation from the other using a rough brick edge. The makeshift grounding wire was crude by professional standards, but it conducted electricity with flawless efficiency. He tested the tension on the line, ensuring it would not snap under strain. The route through the trenches had been calculated, the diversion had been coordinated, the override tool was prepared, every variable was accounted for. Cluck stood motionless at the edge of the worksite, his silhouette sharp against the dawn light, ready to execute the next phase of a plan that required nothing more than perfect timing and an uncooperative weather station. Damp irrigation trenches had become a veritable subterranean artery, weaving through the shadowed underbelly of Muddington acres like veins of forgotten infrastructure. Cluck moved with the deliberate, fluid grace of a seasoned operative navigating a hostile extraction zone. His spurs clicked softly against the packed mud, a rhythmic percussion marking the advance into uncharted territory. Beside him, Henrietta kept pace, her feathers immaculate despite the seeping dampness that clung to every surface. Their temporary comms disruption, due to electronic interference, had forced a return to primal coordination. Yet their formally cemented status as tactical partners with shared command authority meant a raised wing or a sharp tilt of the head conveyed complex operational directives without uttering a sound. Ahead, Gerald charged through the gloom like a hornet of pure, unadulterated chaos. The goat had been designated as an active infiltration asset, his unpredictable nature perfectly suited for creating diversions that no security algorithm could predict. He slammed into the base of a rusted sensor mast with theatrical enthusiasm. Sparks showered the damp earth as the metal groaned under the impact. Instantly, the surrounding perimeter alarms erupted in a cacophony of false positives, red warning lights strobing uselessly across the overgrown grass. It was a masterstroke of misdirection, a digital mirage designed to draw the automated sentry drones away from their true objective. Cluck did not pause to admire his work. The weather station node loomed ahead, a squat concrete bunker bristling with dormant antennae and forgotten gauges. He approached the heavy steel door with the cautious reverence of a bomb disposal specialist approaching a live charge. The biometric lock glowed with an icy blue light, waiting for a fingerprint or retinal scan that neither rooster nor hen could provide. From his wing sack, he produced a length of stripped copper grounding wire, its ends frayed and gleaming. This was the moment of truth. He hooked the wire to the exposed service panel, intending to bridge the circuit and trick the mechanism into believing it had received authorized clearance. Just as Cluck extended his claws to make contact, the heavy thud of boots echoed on the gravel path above. The farmer descended into the trench, carrying a bright yellow feed bucket with an air of benevolent obliviousness. He hummed a cheerful tune, entirely unaware that his prized rooster was currently engaged in a high-stakes operation against a rogue agricultural syndicate. Cluck froze, every muscle locked in tactical paralysis. He calculated the trajectory, the velocity, the sheer mass of the man descending toward the manual release lever hidden beneath a rusted grate. It was too late to shout, and his ordinary clucking would be utterly misinterpreted as a greeting. The farmer's heavy work boot came down squarely on the lever. A sickening crunch echoed through the damp air as metal sheared against metal. The override mechanism seized violently, jamming fast in the wrong position. Cluck watched in silent horror as the copper wire sparked and died, severed by the sudden mechanical failure. The system, deprived of its intended bypass sequence, did not merely register a malfunction. It interpreted the jammed lever and bridged circuit as an active sabotage attempt by hostile forces. A deep, resonant klaxon began to wail from within the weather station's core. Warning strobes shifted from amber to a violent crimson. The concrete walls groaned as internal pressure gauges spiked into the red zone. High-pressure steam purges were designed to incinerate intruders and flush out contaminants, but in this moment, they were aimed directly at the trench where Cluck and Henrietta stood frozen. Henrietta snapped her beak, signaling an immediate abort. The override was jammed beyond recovery. With a sharp squawk of warning, Cluck turned on his heel, his spurs digging into the mud as he scrambled backward. The first jets of superheated steam blasted through the grates with the force of industrial cannons, scalding the air and turning the trench into a boiling cauldron. Retreat forced by necessity, the pair fled deeper into the irrigation network, leaving behind the hissing fury of their own compromised technology. The ventilation shafts tasted of rust, an impending hydrothermal catastrophe. Cluck Norris perched on a corrugated iron rib 3 meters above the coop floor, his wings tucked tight against a chill that had nothing to do with the British dawn. Below him, through a slatted observation grate, the world was dissolving into white. A dense, rolling cloud of superheated steam was already crossing the perimeter fence line, swallowing the old oak tree hole without so much as a hiss of protest. It moved with the relentless, industrial patience of a siege engine. Cluck's internal monologue filed the observation under tactical assessment, thermal output exceeding agricultural safety parameters by approximately 400%. The farmer would call it a boiler leak. The bantam knew better. Henrietta landed silently on the adjacent support beam, her feathers ruffled, but her posture rigid with shared command authority. Their temporary comms disruption hung in the air like static, forcing them to communicate through practiced glances and the unspoken weight of their tactical partnership. She tracked the steam's trajectory with a sharp tilt of her head, then looked directly at Cluck. The realization settled between them instantly, cold and heavy as a dropped anvil. This was not a malfunction. It was the geothermal vent network weaponization plan running on autopilot. Mother Hen's retaliation had bypassed manual overrides and seized the farm's subterranean arteries. The syndicate's extraction team might be grounded, but their automated cleanup protocol was still breathing down Muddington Acres' neck. Cluck shifted his weight, talons scraping against oxidized metal. Fighting the grid directly would require breaching 3 reinforced server racks and outmaneuvering automated sentry drones that were already recalibrating their sweep patterns toward their position. It was a frontal assault disguised as agricultural maintenance. The Bantam despised frontal assaults. True professionals arranged the scenery, not charged into it blindly. He scanned the ventilation architecture, his mind parsing pressure gradients, thermal expansion rates, and the structural integrity of the coop's ancient plumbing. A deduction formed with the quiet certainty of a falling guillotine blade. Reversing the flow did not require hacking a command interface. It required manipulating the coop's own pressure valves. The network was designed to vent excess heat upward during peak solar hours, but if he inverted the primary intake manifold, the thermal siphon would pull back against its own momentum, starving the automated purge sequence of feed pressure. The coop's ancient plumbing operated on principles older than modern espionage, relying on thermal expansion and gravity rather than silicon chips. By routing the excess through the grain elevator's drive shaft, he could create a vacuum differential that would naturally invert the siphon. Henrietta registered the plan in a single sharp blink. She turned her head toward the lower maintenance hatch, where Gerald was already pacing with the restless energy of a spring-loaded mousetrap. The goat had been debriefed post-engagement and marked as an active infiltration asset, though his operational methodology remained gloriously unpredictable. A series of rapid clicks echoed through the shafts, Henrietta's coordination signal. Gerald responded by launching himself at a rusted iron lever buried beneath a pile of discarded poultry feed sacks. The counterweight was heavy enough to anchor a small tractor, but Gerald did not hesitate. He threw his shoulder against the metal bar with the enthusiastic force of a creature who believed every problem could be solved by charging it. Wood splintered. Iron groaned. The linkage shuddered and finally yielded. Down in the subbasement, hydraulic seals popped under renewed tension. Deep within the earth, a massive brass valve rotated on its axis, grinding against decades of sediment before locking into a new orientation. The main flow direction shifted decisively toward the reservoir. High above, the approaching steam cloud stuttered, its leading edge thinning as the subterranean siphon began to draw power back from the weaponization array. Cluck watched the thermal signature recede through the grate, his expression unmoved by the temporary reprieve. The autopilot sequence was identified. The reverse flow strategy was formulated. The valve alignment had shifted. Now came the delicate part, ensuring the mechanical cascade held long enough for the next phase of the operation to unfold. He adjusted his comb, checked the tension on a nearby cable, and waited for the grid to realize it was no longer in control. Cluck perches on the ridge of the coop roof, his claws gripping the corrugated tin with practiced precision. Below him, the weather station perimeter pulses with the erratic rhythm of Agri-Shell's fallback grid, a dying beast gasping for dominance over Muddington acres. The steam he had engineered breaches the outer fence line, an invisible tide of thermodynamic pressure seeking to purge the coordinates where his tactical operations are headquartered. He does not hesitate. Professionalism dictates that the architecture of a mission is only as sound as its final execution. He launches himself from the shadowed eaves, wings beating a silent cadence against the damp morning air. Scrambling along the Coop roof ridge, he navigates the corrugated peaks with practiced precision, driving himself toward the primary pressure regulator as the engineered steam breaches the outer fence line. The heat radiates from the rusted iron sentinel guarding the geothermal vent network's weaponization plan. Mother Hen's betrayal had turned the farm's lifeblood into a siege engine, but Cluck Norris is nothing if not an architect of inconvenient outcomes. He lands on the maintenance gantry, his talons finding purchase on the grated metal walkway. The air here is thick with the scent of ozone and superheated earth, a stark contrast to the familiar, comforting odors of damp straw and cured grain that usually define Muddington acres. To an untrained eye, he is merely a rooster perched precariously near farm equipment, but in truth, he is a professional executing a high-stakes structural intervention. The primary pressure regulator looms before him, its manual crank wheels slick with condensation. He assesses the gradient. The geothermal flow is pushing forward, a runaway current threatening to crack the silos and ignite the fallback grid's capacitors into a fatal cascade. To stop it, he must reverse the tide. It requires physical exertion that would exhaust a lesser rooster, but Cluck treats the valve not as machinery, but as a negotiation of forces. He calculates the torque required, measuring the friction against his talons. He grips the cold iron wheel with both wings. The heat is intense now, singing the feathers along his flanks, but his focus remains absolute. With a guttural crow that is less a call to the dawn and more a declaration of structural realignment, he begins to crank. The metal groans, resisting his avian leverage, protesting the intrusion of organic will upon inorganic design. He does not yield. Every rotation is a calculated maneuver, forcing the internal valves to shift, redirecting the torrent of superheated steam away from the perimeter sensors and back toward the old grain silo. It is a delicate dance of thermodynamics and determination, executed entirely without the aid of his tactical partner, due to the persistent electronic interference that has left him operating on instinct alone. The feedback loop engages with a shuddering thrum that vibrates through the gantry. The geothermal pressure gradient flips, a sudden violent reversal that sends a harmless but massive venting of white vapor billowing into the sky. It is not an explosion of malice, but of physics finally taking its due course. The superheated air washes over the weather station node, and within the insulated housing of the fallback grid, the capacitors cannot handle the sudden surge of reversed polarity. Sparks dance like frantic fireflies before dying out in a cascade of harmless fuses. The drone network above, tethered to that failing grid, sputters and drops from the sky like stones, landing softly in the hay bales with dull thuds. The weaponization plan grinds to a halt, its momentum spent in the old silo, where it dissipates harmlessly against the stacked straw. Cluck steps back from the regulator, his chest heaving slightly, feathers ruffled by the cooling steam that now curls around his talons like morning mist. He observes the cascading failure of the capacitors with the detached satisfaction of a master craftsman watching a poorly assembled mechanism finally collapse under its own weight. The silence that follows is not the silence of a trap, but of a morning restored. The conspiratorial hum of Agri-Shell's machinery is replaced by the distant, familiar cluck of Henrietta and the bleating of Gerald, reminding him that the true battleground had never been the technology, but the soil beneath it. A professional finishes the job before celebrating the victory. Cluck turns his gaze toward the coop, where the first hints of dawn are beginning to bleed across the horizon. The conspiracy is defeated. The farm is safe. He hops down from the gantry, landing with soft thuds on the dewy grass, his mission complete. The first pale light of dawn crested over the rolling hills of Muddington Acres, washing the valley in a soft, silvered haze. Where tactical urgency had tightened the night like a drawn bowstring, morning mist now settled gently across the pastures and fields. The air, once thick with the acrid tang of steam and overheated circuitry, carried only the damp, earthy scent of dew-soaked grass and cooling soil. The geothermal vents lay dormant, their weaponized pressure safely redirected into the old grain silo hours ago. The farm breathed again, slow and steady, its boundaries secure against the encroaching dark. Cluck stood at the threshold of the coop, his feathers ruffled from a night of calculated maneuvers and silent reconnaissance. Inside his mind, the usual noir gravitas remained intact, a seasoned operative cataloguing the aftermath of a successful extraction, but externally he simply tilted his head and let out a soft, ordinary cluck. The cooling metal of the weather station node still hummed faintly in the distance, a reminder of how close the perimeter had come to permanent isolation. The war was over. The Spymaster era had ended for good. He stepped forward onto the weathered floorboards, his talons clicking against the wood with deliberate precision. The routine was non-negotiable. A professional maintained structure even when the world stood still. Cluck approached the feed trough, inspecting it with the same analytical focus he once reserved for structural weaknesses in fortified compounds. He checked the alignment of the wooden slats, verified the dryness of the grain mix, and noted the absence of foreign contaminants. The cipher patch remained active, verified against agri-shell data, a silent testament to the meticulous groundwork laid before the silence fell. To any observer, he was merely a rooster ensuring his breakfast station met basic standards. Internally, he filed the inspection under operational readiness. The silence of the coop felt heavy, not with tension, but with the quiet relief of a mission completed without collateral damage. He remembered the encrypted bursts, the frantic coordination across frequencies that no longer existed. The temporary comms disruption had held firm through the final cascade. Now, communication would have to rely on older, more primitive methods. Through the open doorway, Cluck observed the pasture below. Gerald grazed peacefully near the lower fence line, his chaotic energy finally spent after a day of unintended tactical utility. The goat chewed slowly, utterly unaware that his recent stampede had inadvertently saved the property from a permanent lockdown. Nearby, Henrietta settled onto her favorite roost, positioning herself with practiced grace along the sunlit beam. She regarded him with steady eyes, acknowledging the shift in their dynamic without a single digital handshake or coded signal. Their tactical partnership now operated on a permanent frequency of instinct and observation. Shared command authority required no verification codes, only the steady rhythm of two minds aligned against impending threats. It was cemented in shared experience and mutual respect. The immediate aerial threats from within the ranks had been neutralized, leaving only the quiet understanding between two allies who had navigated the shadows together. Cluck felt a rare moment of genuine warmth beneath his stern exterior. They had won. Muddington Acres remained intact. The morning light grew stronger, burning off the last pockets of mist that clung to the fence posts. It was then that a soft thud echoed against the wooden railing. Cluck turned his head slowly. Perched on the highest post sat a carrier pigeon, its feathers dusted with the residue of a long flight. In its beak rested a slender metal tube, sealed with wax and stamped with unfamiliar insignia. The bird shifted its weight, tapping one talon against the wood, waiting for acknowledgement. Cluck approached the fence line, his movements measured and deliberate. He recognized the signature immediately. The conspiracy had not dissolved, it had merely shifted its center of gravity. A new contract lay coiled inside that tube, encrypted with protocols older than the farm itself. The tactical partnership he shared with Henrietta would need to be activated again. The Spymaster era was over, but the work certainly was not. Cluck locked eyes with the pigeon, gave a single, sharp nod of acceptance, and prepared for the next phase. The quiet morning would soon give way to another night of calculated maneuvers, But for now, the farm slept.